Ryan broke up with me on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day when the sky looks as tired as you feel. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. We were sitting in the corner booth of the small cafe where we'd spent countless afternoons, and he leaned back in his chair like he was delivering a business report. "You're fine, Ava," he said, pausing just long enough to make it sting. "But I need more than fine. I want someone who pushes me, who matches my ambition. You're just average." I remember staring at him, my coffee untouched, my fingers gripping the cup like it could anchor me. Average. The word bounced around my head like it was trying to stick. He listed reasons, as if breaking me down into bullet points would make it easier. I didn't argue. I didn't tell him that the company I had been quietly working for wasn't just my employer, it was my family's empire. That my last name on my work badge was my mother's maiden name, a shield to let me work without the constant shadow of my inheritance. I didn't tell him that I had been choosing to live modestly, to earn my place in a world that would have handed me everything. Because I knew the moment I said it, his eyes would light up, not for me, but for the possibilities. So I let him walk away believing he was moving on to something better. I went home that night and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look average. I didn't feel average. I just looked like someone who had been holding back for too long. That night, I decided I wasn't going to hold back anymore, not for Ryan, not for anyone. I doubled down at work. I stopped blending into the background and started taking on the toughest projects, the ones people avoided because they were too messy, too risky. I stayed late, asked questions no one else dared to, and proved I could navigate the politics of the boardroom as well as the factory floor. It wasn't overnight, but slowly, the right people noticed. My father stopped second-guessing my decisions. Senior executives started coming to me first instead of last. My title didn't change, but my influence did. And all the while, I kept my real name out of sight. The fewer people who knew, the more honest their reactions were. Years passed, and I almost forgot about Ryan, until his name landed on my desk one Monday morning. It was buried in a stack of resumes for a new position I'd created, one that would oversee one of the company's most profitable divisions. My assistant had highlighted him as a strong candidate, noting his previous leadership roles and impressive track record. I skimmed the details. Failed ventures dressed up as learning experiences. Short stints at companies that probably regretted hiring him. And now, here he was, sending his application into my company without realizing it would end up in my hands. I sat back in my chair, the irony sinking in. The man who told me I was too average was now hoping I'd think he was good enough. I didn't toss his application. I didn't reject him outright. Instead, I forwarded it to HR with one note: proceed. The process moved quickly. Ryan's resume made it past HR's initial filter, and within a week he was scheduled for a phone interview. I didn't participate. Not yet. I wanted him to walk through the gates on his own, confident, unaware of what waited on the other side. My role in the company had grown far beyond what most employees could see. Officially, I was listed as a senior executive director. Unofficially, I signed off on every major decision, from global acquisitions to who was allowed to run key departments. The anonymity gave me freedom. I could walk the halls and hear the unfiltered truth, see who thrived without the pressure of a spotlight. And right now, it was letting me watch Ryan without him realizing whose arena he'd stepped into. HR sent me a summary of his first interview. They described him as polished, assertive, and strategically charming. I almost laughed. He had always been good at selling himself, dressing ambition up in the right words. But charm had a shelf life. Under pressure, Ryan had a tendency to talk too much and promise even more. I'd seen it before. I wanted to see it again, this time from the other side of the table. I approved him for round 2. In the meantime, I dug into his history. I had the resources to pull up more than a LinkedIn profile. I saw the failed tech startup that ran out of funding in 8 months. The consulting role that ended in mutual separation, which was corporate code for disaster. The bridge he burned with a previous investor who accused him of arrogance. It wasn't just failure. It was a pattern. But he had dressed it up well enough to keep getting chances. That was about to change. 2 weeks later, Ryan walked into the building for his second interview. I wasn't in the room. I was behind the mirrored glass in the observation suite, a feature we used for senior-level assessments. He couldn't see me, but I could see everything. Every twitch of his mouth, every flicker of his eyes. He still looked the same in some ways. Broad-shouldered. Confident. The same expensive taste in suits. But there was a new edge in the way he carried himself, like someone who had been knocked down more than once and was terrified of it happening again. He shook hands with the panel, smiled at every question, and leaned forward just enough to seem engaged without looking desperate. I watched the way he spun his failures into stories of resilience, how he framed short tenures as strategic career moves. He was good. I could almost believe him, if I didn't know the truth. When the interview ended, the panel seemed impressed. One department head even said he was exactly the kind of leader they needed. I didn't comment. I just sent a single message to the coordinator: advance him to the final round. The next time we met, there wouldn't be any glass between us. The final round was always held in the executive suite, a polished space with floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the city skyline. It was designed to impress, to make candidates feel like they were stepping into a place they'd do anything to belong to. Ryan was told he'd be meeting the senior executive director, the one who would make the ultimate hiring decision. My name wasn't on the email. It never was. I wanted the moment to hit him without warning. In the days before the interview, I planned every detail. I chose a black tailored suit with sharp lines and a subtle diamond pin at the collar, a quiet display of status without a single word. I reviewed his application again, highlighting key points I could use to press him. I didn't want to humiliate him outright. I wanted to watch the confidence drain from his face slowly, like a truth he couldn't escape. On the morning of the meeting, I arrived early and stood by the window, the city moving below me. When the door opened, I didn't turn right away. I let him take those first few steps inside before facing him. His stride faltered. For the first time since I'd known him, Ryan didn't know what to say. "Ava?" he asked, his voice caught between disbelief and the beginnings of panic. "Mr. Taylor," I said evenly, using his last name like we'd never met before. "Please, have a seat." He sat down slowly, eyes flicking around the room like he was trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't know existed. "I didn't know you worked here," he said finally. "I do more than work here," I replied, my tone measured. "Let's talk about your experience." I began with neutral questions, letting him find his rhythm again. He answered smoothly, clearly trying to regain control. But then I leaned forward. "You've moved between positions quite a lot in the last few years. Why should I believe you'll stay here?" He hesitated, just for a second, before launching into a rehearsed line about seeking the right fit. I didn't smile. "And when things don't go your way, do you usually leave, or do you fight to improve the situation?" That hesitation came again, just slightly longer. He gave another polished answer, but the cracks were showing. I watched him shift in his seat. When the interview ended, he stood, expecting a handshake. I didn't offer one. "You'll hear from us soon," I said simply. As he left, I caught his reflection in the glass, still confident on the surface, but with uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't know yet. But he would. The moment the door closed behind Ryan, I sat back in my chair and let the silence stretch. My assistant stepped in, holding a folder. Inside were the final evaluations from the panel. Every one of them recommended him for the role. On paper, he had passed every test. But the hiring decision didn't belong to them, it belonged to me. I didn't reject him right away. That would have been too easy, too clean. Instead, I scheduled a follow-up meeting, telling HR that I needed more information before making my choice. It was unusual, but no one questioned me. I had earned the kind of authority that didn't require explanations. That afternoon, I walked through the production floor. I liked being there, the hum of the machines, the steady rhythm of work. It reminded me why I had fought so hard to prove I could run this place. A few employees stopped me to ask about ongoing projects. Others simply nodded, unaware that the woman answering their questions was the owner's daughter, the person who signed their paychecks. Later, I stopped by the archives. There, tucked between reports and old contracts, I found something I hadn't thought about in years, a box of press clippings from when Ryan and I were still together. Photos from events we'd attended. Quotes he'd given about wanting to make it big. One headline in particular caught my eye. It was from an interview where he had been asked about his future. "I'm looking for someone who can match my drive," he'd said. "Someone who's more than just comfortable in an average life." I remembered the night that quote had been published. I had laughed it off in front of him, but inside, it had carved a deep mark. He'd been talking about me. And now, years later, he was sitting in a glass office asking me for a chance to work under my leadership. I closed the box and locked it away. The next morning, I sent word for Ryan to come back for a final discussion. The invitation was deliberately vague. When he arrived, I had him wait in the observation room. From there, he could see me through the glass as I finished a meeting with 2 senior executives. I kept my voice calm, deliberate, the tone of someone in full control. I didn't look at him right away. I wanted him to have time to think. To wonder. When I finally stepped into the room, I placed a single sheet of paper in front of him. It wasn't a contract. It was a list of performance expectations for the role he was after, each one more demanding than the last. "Before I make my decision," I said, "I want to know if you're capable of meeting these standards." He looked down at the list, and for the first time, I saw it. Hesitation, not just in his eyes, but in the way his hand tightened around the pen. He didn't answer right away. And in that pause, I knew exactly how this was going to end. Ryan's hesitation lasted only a breath, but it was enough. I saw the flicker of doubt before he masked it with a practiced smile. "Of course I can meet these," he said, trying to sound confident. "I've handled bigger challenges." I leaned back, watching him the way you might watch a poker player bluff. "Good," I said. "Because here, we don't reward ambition without proof." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He was used to impressing people with words alone. I wasn't one of them. I let the silence sit before asking about the gaps in his career history. He launched into his rehearsed answers again, but I pushed deeper, specifics about revenue, decisions he'd made, the actual results. His charm started to fray. The truth was, Ryan had always been good at selling the dream, but not as good at delivering it. That was fine when he was dating women who didn't question him or working for bosses who liked his energy more than his execution. But here, sitting across from me, there was nowhere to hide. By the time the meeting ended, I had every answer I needed. He left the room with that same confident walk, but I could tell it wasn't the same confidence he walked in with. He knew this wasn't just another interview. That night, I stayed late in the office, looking out over the city. I thought about the girl I had been when he left me, quiet and proven, careful not to show too much of herself. Back then, he saw me as a stepping stone he didn't need. Now, I was the one deciding whether he got to step through the next door. The irony was sharp enough to taste. HR followed up with me the next morning, asking if I'd made my decision. I told them to schedule one last meeting, this time in the boardroom. No one gets invited there for an interview. It's where major deals are made, where the weight of the company sits in every polished surface. I wanted the space to do some of the talking for me. When Ryan arrived, he looked around like he'd just stepped into another world. "This is impressive," he said, trying to mask his awe. I sat at the head of the table, a position I'd grown into without apology. "It should be," I said. "This is where we decide the future of the company." His eyes lit up at that. He thought he was part of it now. I folded my hands, meeting his gaze. Before we continue, there's something you should know. I didn't tell him yet. I wanted him to hear every question I had for him, to answer them without the filter of knowing who I was. Because when the reveal came, I wanted it to land with the full weight of everything he'd already said to me. I started with questions about leadership, not the generic kind he could recite from a book, but scenarios pulled from real situations in this company's history. I asked him what he would do if a department head tried to cut costs by replacing long-term employees with cheaper contractors. He hesitated, then gave an answer about efficiency and hard decisions, one that sounded like it belonged in a shareholder presentation. I kept my expression neutral. Then I shifted to strategy. I asked how he would approach expanding into a market we had once failed in, a detail not public knowledge. He guessed, confident but wrong. I didn't correct him. I just made notes. The more we spoke, the more he leaned forward, trying to win me over. I could see the way he watched my reactions, the way he adjusted his tone every time I gave him nothing to read. Ryan had always been a performer. Now he was performing for someone whose approval could decide his career. At one point, he said, "I think I'd be a great asset to this company. I believe in loyalty, and I'm ready to dedicate myself fully here." The words nearly made me laugh. Loyalty. From the man who had walked away from me because he thought he could do better. I didn't laugh, though. I wanted the moment to simmer. When the interview was over, I closed my folder and looked at him. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Taylor. I'll be making my final decision shortly." He nodded, confident again, as though he thought my calm meant approval. I watched him leave the boardroom, the sound of the door clicking shut echoing in the large space. As soon as he was gone, I opened the file in front of me. Inside was his full employment history, laid out with every red flag highlighted. I had enough to end this now. But ending it abruptly felt too merciful. I wanted him to know exactly why the door was closing in his face. I called HR and told them to arrange one last meeting, just him and me. No panels, no observers, no mirrored glass. I wanted him across the table with no distractions when I told him who I really was. And I wanted to watch the realization hit him, the moment he understood that the woman he once dismissed as too average now had the power to decide whether he'd be unemployed by the end of the week. The meeting was set for Friday morning. I chose the smaller executive conference room this time. More intimate, less formal than the boardroom, but still unmistakably a place of authority. The walls were lined with glass shelves holding awards, each one a reminder that this company was built on results, not excuses. I arrived early, reviewing the folder one last time. I didn't need it. I had every detail memorized. When Ryan walked in, he wore the same confident smile he had carried through the entire process. "Morning," he said, taking a seat without waiting to be offered one. That small assumption didn't go unnoticed. I let the silence hang before speaking. "Mr. Taylor," I began, my voice even, "you've made it to the final stage of our hiring process. Before we proceed, I think it's important we discuss something." He straightened, clearly ready to talk about his qualifications again. I didn't give him the chance. "You knew me once. Years ago." I watched his brow furrow before his eyes widened slightly. "Ava," he said slowly, testing the name like it didn't fit here. You thought I was average," I cut in. "Your words. You said you needed someone who could match your ambition. And you left." He blinked, caught between discomfort and disbelief. That was a long time ago. Not long enough for me to forget. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "You've been interviewing for a position that reports directly to me. And I don't mean as your department head." I paused, letting the next words land one by one. "I own this company." His mouth opened slightly before he shut it again, searching for something to say. "You own every share," I confirmed. "Every decision. Every hiring choice." He looked away for a second, his confidence cracking under the weight of the truth. "I didn't know," he muttered. "That much is obvious." I pushed the folder toward him. Here's the thing, Ryan. I believe in hiring people who add value. People who bring more than charm and a nice suit. I've read your history. I've seen the patterns. And I don't make decisions based on potential that never turns into results. He swallowed hard. So that's it? You're rejecting me because of the past? I'm rejecting you because of the present, I said calmly. The past is just the reminder of why I trust my instincts. He sat there in silence, his eyes darting to the folder like the answers he needed might be written inside. I didn't move, letting the quiet press down on him until it became unbearable. You have to admit, he finally said, his tone shifting to something almost pleading, I'm qualified for this role. You've seen my interviews, my ideas. Whatever happened between us personally shouldn't decide this. I tilted my head slightly. If this were personal, I wouldn't have let you make it this far. Every panel you met with recommended you. I gave you the chance to prove yourself. And you proved exactly what I expected. His shoulders stiffened. Which is? That you look good on the surface, I said, my voice steady, but when it comes to execution, you've left a trail of unfinished work and burned bridges. This company isn't a stepping stone for you to polish your image. We build here. We commit here. He tried to laugh, but it came out forced. So what? You brought me in just to turn me down? No, I replied. I brought you in to see if time had changed you. It hasn't. I stood, signaling the meeting was over. He didn't get up right away, as if staying in the chair might keep the decision from being final. Ava, that's Mrs. Hale to you in this office, I said, my tone sharp enough to cut the air. His mouth snapped shut. I walked to the door and opened it. HR will follow up with you regarding the conclusion of the process. Thank you for your time. It was the exact line we used to end interviews politely, but there was nothing polite about the way I looked at him when he finally stood. As he walked past me, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass wall, still in that expensive suit, but smaller somehow, like the room had stolen the space he once took up. I didn't watch him leave the building. I didn't need to. I knew the moment the doors closed behind him, the story would start to sink in. Somewhere out there, Ryan was replaying every conversation we'd had in this process, realizing just how much I had seen, how much I had known from the start. And I was already moving on to the next meeting, because the truth was, this was never about Ryan. It was about making sure I never again forgot the difference between being underestimated and being in control. News of the decision spread quietly through the company. Senior staff were told only that Ryan's application had been declined after final review, but rumors found their way into the hallways as they always did. Whispers about how the confident candidate had left the building pale and silent. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I had no interest in making a spectacle of him. My victory didn't need an audience, it was in knowing that he'd walked in believing he had the upper hand and walked out understanding exactly how wrong he was. A week later, I received an email from him. No subject line, no greeting. Just a few sentences asking if we could meet outside of the office to talk. I deleted it without replying. Whatever conversation he thought we needed to have, I had already had it, and I'd had it on my terms. Instead, I focused on the expansion project we'd been preparing for months. It was the kind of high-stakes venture that could redefine the company's reach. The board had approved my strategy unanimously, and my team was already moving at full speed. We were making real progress, without Ryan, without anyone who saw this place as a ladder to climb instead of a home to build. Still, there was a part of me that couldn't help but think back to the day he ended things. How certain he'd been that I couldn't keep up with him. How easily he'd dismissed me because I wasn't flashy enough to match the image he had in his head. Now, the same man had sat across from me in a suit, trying to convince me he was worth my time. And I had been the one to decide he wasn't. That shift, the power in it, was something I felt in my bones. Late one evening, as I was reviewing a proposal, my assistant stepped in to say there was someone waiting in the lobby. He says it's important, she told me carefully. I didn't need her to say his name. I already knew. I considered sending her back with a message that I wasn't available. But something in me wanted to see what his face looked like without the polished mask of an interview. I closed the file on my desk and stood. If he was here to ask for another chance, I already knew the answer. But this time, I'd give it to him in the most definitive way possible, face to face, without the formality of a conference table or the polite language of a hiring decision. This time, it wouldn't be about process. It would be about closure. Mine, not his. I found him in the lobby, standing near the glass wall with his hands in his pockets. Without the safety of a tailored suit under bright conference lights, Ryan looked smaller. Not physically, he was still broad-shouldered and neatly dressed, but the sharpness in his posture was gone. When he saw me, he straightened, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ava," he began, his voice carrying that careful blend of hope and nerves, "thanks for coming down. I needed to talk to you without all the walls and formality." I stopped a few feet away from him. There were no walls in that interview, Ryan. Just the truth. He shifted, glancing briefly at the reception desk where the staff pretended not to listen. "I made a mistake," he said. "Back then, and maybe even in there. I didn't see you for who you were. I want to fix that." I let the words hang for a moment. "You can't fix it. This isn't about a second chance. This is about who we are now. I've built something here. You've been moving from one thing to the next, always looking for a shortcut. That's why you're not here." He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead his shoulders dropped. "I really needed this job," he admitted quietly. "And I needed you to believe in me." "I don't make decisions based on need," I said, my voice firm but calm. "I make them based on value. And the truth is, I don't see yours here." His jaw clenched. "So that's it. That's it." I stepped past him toward the security doors, then paused just long enough to look back. "I was average in your eyes once. But in mine, you've always been exactly the man I saw across that cafe table, someone who only knows my worth when he needs it." His face tightened, but he didn't follow me. I walked through the glass doors without looking back again. By the time I reached my office, I felt lighter. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had closed a chapter on my terms. Ryan had walked away from me years ago certain he'd find someone better. Today, he walked out of my building knowing he never would.